a selected audience, so to say. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us at the COVESA. We are excited to be here. We have a talk about payment platform development. We say also OEM adoption. Let me fix that a bit. OEM adoption. So, which is pretty interesting because, like with the previous talk that was given, I think we have a perfect anchor point because the call for reference architecture in terms of a wallet getting into the car, we have something to share because we built that and it's already used out there in the wild, right? So OEMs are making use of what we have in our portfolio. And I want to kind of give you some of the backgrounds why we went that route. I also, with my comment on the previous talk, I wanted to open up a bit the perspective on the payments in the car to generate transactions. And this is what we want to talk about today. So it's maybe a little more theoretical, but be ensured everything I talk about is just the underlying foundation to a real product we have. We call it the Hellgate e-wallet. Hellgate is our payment orchestration product we use to orchestrate like also e-com, POS, and all of the other payments that you see out in the wild. And we went into the modality of the car with the product we call e-wallet, which is basically a cloud-based identity solution, making payments and transactions seamless in complex mobility ecosystems. So that was the run down the road. I will now kind of try to pick you up at the beginning. And first of all, I want to introduce myself. So I'm Markus. I'm the one of the two co-founders of Starfish, and I'm the chief techie in the company. So have a background in automotive since the 90s. I've been working with Daimler Chrysler at the beginning, doing some vision stuff, trying to find lanes and obstacles on the street in the early days when things were not called machine learning, but was just like neural networks being applied. Since more than 10 years, we're in the payment industry. So Johnny said we startup, but we're like more established business, but with a startup mentality in the corporation. So if you want to reach out to me, it's Markus at Starfish team. As I said, I'm the tech guy and also responsible for the products. So what we do at Starfish, quick rundown, such that you know what we do. So we are a company, so 50 plus people, exact count, I can't really tell you. We've grown a lot the last year. From the 50 plus people, we're about 90% engineers. Like it's really focused on real stuff. Like we want to make something happen. Although I'm coming from consulting and a lot of other people coming from consulting, we can talk a lot, but being sure we do a lot of stuff in the background. So the 4 pillars of our work is strategy. So for example, mobility payment ecosystems, something we advise our customers because we see there's demand to pull them into the right direction to get things moving. It's integration project, obviously, getting banks inside. It's the custom-made solution. So excited. We just brought a native in-car payment experience with a big luxury automotive OEM live recently, which is really payments in the car. And finally, we have product engineering. I told you about that. We have our Hellgate product suite, which is basically our take on the payments world, on the transactional world, which makes us faster when doing our rest of the projects. Like it's just like an accelerator. In all of our projects, actually, and this is something where we are also excited to be here at COVESA, we are filling gaps. And we do see a lot of gaps out there with respect to what's possible today in terms of the payment solutions that we find, or the solutions in general, and what the problem statements are. So for example, with the native in-car payment thing, we had the problem statement how to make that happen in a car today, right? Without the need to do, for example, MIT and stuff like that, that you do find a lot of incumbent out there. And we had to kind of go that uncharted terrain and find basically what to fill in there. And this is the way we want to approach it. So again, a slide with our take, let's getting real. Let's do the stuff in reality, find out how it works, then generalize from that, and that's why we're so excited to talk about in that reference architecture topic, because we need to digest and bring something into the market which makes sense for the broader community. So let's talk now about payments and the marketing stuff away. So now you know about Starfish in general. Let's talk about payments platform development and the consideration for OEMs in adoption. So big question here would be like, okay, what's that? Like, what's a payments platform in general? Like, we talked about in a lot of the sideline conversations about ecosystems and platforms and whatnot, but I think it's important for us all when we talk about a reference platform or an implementation of reference platform in general, that we have a proper understanding what we talk about. Like, what is that real platform thing? And then you also see, I said it before, we pulled out of the payments domain a bit because we think in that ecosystem topic, transactions in general are of importance. So we need to talk about those transactions in general, and for that we need to understand that. So taking that, first I want to get our head around the payments platform thing. Then we want to look at what the OEMs did, do, and are supposed to do or should do in the future. And then third part, we want to continue the call that we already have. Let's collaborate. Let's bring the thing together. Let's make something awesome. And little disclaimer, I will not talk about use cases. Like, we'll not talk about getting, I don't know, curbside delivery, whatnot. There are beautiful companies out there who have a great take on that. We are solely on the side making all of that seamless. But I'm happy to share our conversations and our experience we have there, of course. So what is a platform in general? Well, the internet tells us a bit about that. So platforms is like a business and technology perspective. You all know that. Both have the same intent. So business perspective obviously wants to facilitate exchange. So we talked about that, like making transactions seamless of one or more independent groups. Like, you need to have those independent groups operating on your system. So what we do see a lot today is that the OEMs make their business for themselves. So like features on demand, like extensions of features that are in the car already. But when we talk about platforms, we think about what's next when come a third party or other third parties into that equation. And the value creation of those platforms typically is coming from enabling these groups to do something which they could not do with the same efficiency or effectiveness without. So this is also like, from the consulting perspective from our side, this is the strong call to the OEMs, find your spot. It's not just be there is enough. No, you need to find a spot where you can make the difference for the partners on the ecosystem. And the technology is the same thing, it's just a different angle. We need to have a set of technologies, standards, whatever, everything we love when we are techies, right? And we use that as a foundation to enable acceleration to make things happen. It's the same take, but from a different angle. In the OEM world, a lot of the discussion is on the lower level. Like, it's very tech savvy. The business does not play a big role, or we have a lot of business conversation, but we don't have the techies with us. So this is like call number one for the OEMs in the room, if there are. We need to integrate the two into one single statement, right? So you can't imagine how hard we fight to get the tech into the car to do the upper, or have the tech in the car to get the upper, right? So this needs to be integrated. That said, let's talk about a platform. So there's something, I am a platform, and what does the platform do? It actually brings a couple of parties in there, and what's the value of the platform? Well, it makes the A possible, it makes the C possible also, right? And then it makes the exchange of those more easy and more fluently, and with that said, we have an ecosystem. So the platforms define our ecosystem ultimately. Or maybe not the ecosystem itself, but more like the boundary around the ecosystem that we have. So with that said, what is the kind of, with the boundaries in place, right, and the intrinsic structure, let's look a bit inside of those platforms. So this platform is still there, still a platform. We have the ecosystem boundaries there. And now we come to a point where I think also in the conversation we have within COVESA, in the take we have on it, we need to open up a bit like, where's the boundary of our problem statement? So first of all, we have those ecosystem parties, so the A's, the B's, the C's. Like on a normal platform, we're going to have the two-sided market, so supply, demand come together on Amazon marketplaces to do something magical, right? But there's also another take which is important, which is the modalities, we call them. Like, how are things happening? Under what circumstances are things happening? And typically, if you talk to the stakeholder groups, you end up in one of those silos. It's a POS thing, it's an e-com thing, it's a mobile thing, or it's a car thing, right? But our call here is the second one. Let's think traversal here. So a journey and mobility is the ultimate, cars or vehicles are the ultimate mobility journeys. Start maybe at home in e-com. On the run, you have on the run to the bus, you have mobile experiences. Then you enter a rental car, you have an in-car experience. You will charge it, and you see, we will change those modalities a lot when we move. And what we need to do as tech providers, as an ecosystem, as OEMs, we need to make fluent transitions happen. And with that in place, we can have those rich experiences people are searching for. I don't want to just have the beautiful in-car experience and then like a bad transition into a mobile world. I need to transition fluently over there and back, right? So the big question is like, when I plug in my car for the EV charging, is it a good idea to get into the car again to start charging? Probably not, because I already exited it and maybe want to do something else. So probably it's a good idea to give the ability to start the charging or do the authorization somewhere else, right? That said, we have to think about the entire set or the entire box of the ecosystem, and this is actually where we play the most. This is where Starfish is operating. We provide product services to make all of that happen. So now we talked about platform, technology behind ecosystem modalities, but there was another take in our title, like it's a payments platform. What is a payments platform in general? And this is something where we also learned a lot the last, 15 years on that. Because if you think about that, two parties, like A and B, buyer and seller, coming together, there's a couple of interactions they have. So there's first of all the service being provided, so like the charging, right? And in order to do the charging, we need to have a contract in place. So it's another kind of relationship we have. And there's a third one, which is the interesting one, which is the payment. Like all of that happens typically under the realm of a payment because of value exchange. And if we focus our transactional optimization, making things easier, with the take on the payment, we talk about a payments platform. A platform that takes the payments as the means to coordinate. So if you think, for example, about the Apple Pay, it's actually a take on payments platform. They don't want to interfere with you and Angry Birds service being provided in the contract you make on the App Store. They focus solely on the payment experience there. So you feel you do something with the Apple, and the security. We also talked about the sense of security on the OEM side, but they don't step into the actual service provisioning and the actual contract that's being made. They just facilitate that, and by that, they earn a whole shit of money. Like, this is really a profitable business. And if you think about it from a terms of a efficiency perspective, this is the one interaction that you can automate the most, that has the lowest kind of cost, incremental cost in it, that scales like crazy if you do it well. Providing services, getting contracts in place, it's a different story. And if you think about ecosystem development as an OEM, you want to get more partners on your platform, you need to have the least incremental cost. And that's why our advice always goes, start with the payments, get a hang on that. You can control the commercial ecosystem, you can control the most important interaction for the customer, which is money, like getting their money out of the pocket, and you can again kind of build upon the touch points you already have, so to say. The payments platform is just a platform, but it focuses mainly on the payment interaction. So does it matter for an OEM? Yeah, well, we say yes, it does, because, as I said, it's the most effective means that we have to define the boundaries of ecosystems. It's also very efficient, as I said, in terms of the incremental cost. So we can kind of scale very quickly, have a lot of control, and scale with it without a lot of burden. So just to give you a sideline comment on that, we have a lot of conversations with our OEM partners who want to internalize services before they kind of sell them again. So like a reselling approach, giving you the big kind of trade-off that you need to get all of those services into your organization. You have got the warranty stuff and whatnot. It's really high cost at the end. And last but not least, of course, we have the ability to then monetize the network connections. Like, it gives us the ability to have a share of two things happening in our ecosystem without the need to pipe the service through us at the end of the day. Last but not least, it builds a strong customer relationship. I think that's pretty clear where the money is. The people are really concerned the most, right? And the security concerns definitely are high. If we do that well, we can get our customers at the right place. Okay. That said, it matters for the OEMs for sure. So what are OEMs now doing on that, right? So as I said, like Jens and myself, we are operating in that sphere since quite some time, and we have found like 3 stages of evolution out there. These 3 stages of evolution are not necessarily like sequential, but they're just like descriptions of where they are at the moment. And we have the first one, which is like a very prominent one, which is also like luckily getting rare, the stage of evolution, which is more described like this. It's like, what are they doing? They hide, right? Try to not get into it, or at least distant enough in terms of these complications that are there, because it's certainly a new business model. You need to kind of live with new consequences, interacting with customers directly. It's not just selling a car and then it's gone, so to say. You have to interact more frequently. So hiding your head in the bushes is one of the stereotypes that we find. The other one is doing this. It's hard to see. It's like a Vietnamese rice garden. They stack one layer on top of the other. Like it's like the car layer, and then the car platform layer, and then there's like a marketplace layer, and then there's a sub-marketplace layer. You stack it up. By that, you kind of defer the problem to the outside rim of your ecosystem. Also like a way to push it away. And the third kind of evolutionary state we find is the ones that really fly. And this is really interesting. These days, a lot of the OEMs start to fly. They got it, they got the point, and I think it's a call for us as COVESA in that setup to make them to help them make flying like an easy journey, and also kind of pick up speed. So if we put the three side by side, I made them here again, we see the one who focuses more on the core competencies they have. In here you see also, like I tried to kind of depict it on the bottom left, vehicle and commerce are side by side. They can coexist. They have some interconnections, but they're really like loosely coupled. In the middle, we aggregate on top of the core competences we have. So meaning like the car is part of the commerce thing. And on the ones that develop the new competences, you see we inverted basically. The commerce is part of the vehicle, or like the mobility ecosystem that the OEM can define. So the big question here will be, if we come from the left to the middle, is it possible to move as an OEM from middle to the right? Because there will be lock-in effects definitely on the kind of the commerce experiences around them. So this is a big topic we discuss, and the big question we got and we built into our products is like an answer to have a good and strong lever to stay ahead of the curve and be able to move to the right, if it makes sense. So that said, okay, now let's fly. What do we need to do as an OEM to make all of that happen, and what's our take to make this transactional world efficient enough? Well, it's not that easy, because there's the one problem that we need to solve first, right? And that one problem, I think it was mentioned a couple of times this morning, we all share an understanding. We just want to raise it again. The one problem is, actually I have a take from the 80s, like on the internet, nobody knows your dog. This is a famous quote from the New Yorker from 1983 or something, right? The point I want to make here is like, on the platform, no one knows your dog. And this is like the biggest problem we surface at the moment, or we feel at the moment. Like, really need to know who is interacting with whom on our platform, which has massive scale. If you just consider steady state, with a selected amount of parties interacting, easy, right? But if you consider growth, exponential growth, this is a mess, right? And this is coming back to a famous quote again from David Birch, very intelligent guy. So if you know everyone, the transactions are easy, right? And we need to get to the space where we know a lot of our parties interacting, right? Because if we don't know them, the transactions are tricky. And you experience that every day. If you do transactions on mobile web, or on the web, or on the car, we have to find and be very creative to fix the tricky part of it. And the tricky part, and the ideas we need to kind of come up with, like logins and more logins and other logins. You need to kind of type in a lot of passwords, whatnot. You have to 3D secure, right? You need to add like banking standards to make the identity world a little easier. You might have like processes, onboarding, like intentionally confining the ecosystem, right? To don't have a problem with the identities. And ultimately, this is like the least resort, then outsourcing. Just get rid of it. Like, I don't want to worry about that from an OEM perspective. But mention, and I want to really mention that, in that moment you lose the customer. If you outsource identity, the contact point with the customer is gone. It's not there anymore. So all of that is in place. We live with it, and we want to make that a little more smooth. So what we can do here actually is going back to David Birch's. So do you know David Birch? Like, it's a beautiful book out there, Identity is the New Money. I can highly recommend reading it. It's pretty kind of aged already, but it's a really eye-opening book about his take on how to make transactions easy. It was actually also like the inspiring moment when we started to build our product. So what we can do is we can try to inherit David's key model. And the key model consists of like 3 types of identities that we need to have in place. The one is the mundane identity, which is my passport, that's me, right? That physical presence of this like cell block here, right? Then we have the digital identities, which are typically represented by cryptographic assets. We use FIDO2, but there's other means to do that. These are the ones where you do authentication, so really finding out who you are. And on top of that, you're going to find what David calls the virtual identities, like the authorization domain. That's where you do the transactions, like you have the parking account on top of a digital identity, you have a charging account, and maybe you have a payments account, like you log in with your bank. And all of that can go back to the one digital identity in the middle. And if we get a good strong hold on the OEM side on a digital identity, which is able to traverse through the modalities we talked about, right? We have a great means to do transactions on the left side easy, right? And that's actually where we kind of enter the scene with our product. And I think we have, we can share more of that. Like, I think the reference architecture discussion will kind of bring more of our take on that. But our main proposition here is, if that's taken, if that's said, and if that's a good idea to do so, we think the car is the perfect place to store an identity. It's really like you have a perfect factor of possession. Like, it's like if you think about multi-factor authentication, you need factor of possession, factor of inherence, factor of knowledge. So the car itself is perfect factor of possession. You have it, and you can enclose the cryptographic assets for the digital identity in there. You can safely store in there, which is a little tricky part. Not all of the OEMs are ready to give access, for example, to hardware security modules in the car where you can store those assets securely. So we need to think about the cloud topic a bit, right, in that transitional moment. But ultimately, we in the Starfish world, and I think a lot of you guys as well, we are strongly believer of decentralized wallets, decentralized identities. Let them sit where they are really secure. On the other side, cars are already highly vibrant. Like, there's a lot of interaction happening, right? So there's not just the ability to store a digital identity in the car with a good protection and a good correlation to the factor of possession. There's also a reason to do that, because we have a lot of interactions around us. And ultimately, those cars are connected and smart. Like, let's use that. So they have like connectivity, they have like vibrant ecosystems, as we said, on top of that. So all of that makes it a very nice place to come together, to tie it all up and make transactions as smooth as possible. So how that looks like, I want to show you in an abstracted view on our latest implementations that we did, where you do see basically the use of a digital identity in practice. This is actually like the incarnation of the wallet, so to say. So, and you probably have taken as like one of the topics from the talk from my side today, it's not just payments, it's all general interactions that we have. And you do see it here. It's like our problem statement that we got was the following. How can the charging provider interact with the driver without prior complicated onboarding? So think yourself sitting in the car. You have your beautiful dashboard of your nice new EV, right? And there's a marketplace on it, and there's a app popping up, like situational, because of an opportunity for charging, which you did not have a contact relationship with. This is a potential for network ecosystem expansion for the entire system. Like, how do we get that new service provider into play quickly without onboarding, sign-up forms, sending cards somewhere and whatnot? So the big thing was how to get that done. And our take was basically the following. So we need to have the driver ID first in place, which is basically what we said, the digital identity residing in the car in the combination with the human. The human brings the two factors into play. So in our case, it's possession and typically a biometrics. So we take it from camera, fingerprint, but any other allowed second factor, if you think about PSD2, SCA, for example, like a PIN, would do the job, but we need it too. So this is like the experience part of it. So as a first value proposition, we need to give the charging provider who has a virtual ID like the login maybe to its own service, we need to give an ability to link the virtual ID to a digital ID. And that's actually the only onboarding that happens. So in the moment you activate the app on the dashboard, we make use of the digital identity in the car with the strong proposition of the OEM behind it, knowing who it is. The service provider can rely on that. And in that case, it's also like something you could sell as an OEM at the end of the day. We can do the authentication to the service just without any further friction. So we create an account out of the blue. You know the experience, it's nothing we invented. If you do, when I was traveling to Portland once, I was kind of heading out of the airport. I wanted to take a ride with Lyft. I didn't have a Lyft account. I opened the Lyft app, paid with the Apple Pay, and that was everything I did. Like the whole account was opened with the digital identity of Apple sitting on my smartphone. Like that's the only thing you need to do for the onboarding. With that in place, we have a business relationship between the charging provider and the human and the car. The second thing you need to do, and in order to make that dashed line possible, such that the service provider can get the money for this service, we need to have another trust bridge in place. And that trust bridge is between the digital ID a bank has, because they also kind of provide digital IDs, you know it from your banking applications and whatnot, to the driver ID. And this is like the secret sauce of the whole platform. If we are able to build those trust bridges, we can defer or basically delegate the authentication required in the banking world to the car to make a smooth transition between driver and the charging provider to allow them charge for their services on a processing rail of any means. So you can do that with direct interactions with banks, for example, in the SEPA world, or you can do it using the card schemes, for example, with network tokenization. You could use the fancy delegate authentication, which is around there. But what I want to say, we are not limited to those channels. It's just all about knowing who interacts with whom. And that works pretty smoothly and allows the service provider to really grow in that ecosystem, and with the control of that yellow box, keep the OEM in play to control what happens with whom. Also like limiting, like the service providers, curating the service providers, etc. So that's working. That's not a draft. This is actual software, actual solution out there. We are happy to kind of share that. We are happy to integrate it into the ecosystem of the COVESA. And this brings me to my final take, basically. There's still a lot left to do. Like this is not solved in any bigger sense. Like we have a lot of bricks that come together. We need to collaborate to support the OEMs on their journey to payments platforms. Because we believe on the Starfish side, and I think a lot of you do as well, with payments in that ecosystem, we can really kind of make a difference, make those ecosystems scale, grow, and get more rich in the experiences. And with that, I think we have a good starting point for conversation. And the only thing that's left for me to thank you for listening and having a chat about authentication, identities, and the combination of payments into the car. Thank you. Questions? Please.
Just an interesting reflection on that people own their cars. Is that a presumption you have for mobility and going forwards?
Yeah. The question was like if the owning the car is a prerequisite basically for. Actually, currently yes, right? Because of the way we kind of bind basically a mundane identity to a car, the process we follow at the moment requires the driver to own it basically. On the next revision of that take we also consider like identities that can move between the cars. So also kind of considering like rental car situations or any like car sharing situations in that regard. But it's a little more tricky because we have to move a very precious kind of cryptographic asset in that case, right? Or we have to reestablish it again and again, which makes it a little cumbersome. So this is the part where currently ownership is important, but we have some plans to move it into like more transitional moments as well.
Is that similar to you own your phone?
Yes.
And when I get a new phone, yeah. I've got to...
You know it from the Apple Pay, Google Pay. Yeah, you have to set it up again. You know, like that's the point. If you only think about like the normal transaction without moving money, I think we can go a little more easy on that, right? But as we have the trust, you know, coming back here, with the trust bridge from the bank, there's like an obligation to do that very well. You won't get the trust bridge if the bank cannot trust what happens down the scenes, right? So that's why the connection between human and car is very strong, right? And it's reflected in the ID residing in the car, right? But I get your point, like this is the ultimate movement then, yeah.
Okay, but then just going a little bit further on that then, what about the passenger personas or people driving as a taxi or something? I want to get just in time delivery of food.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, this doesn't work because I don't own my car and I'm not the driver.
Yeah.
You're cutting out rather a number of use cases.
Yeah, well,
maybe.
I think that's a great point coming back to my modality topic. In that specific case, I would argue probably the in-car payment is not the best solution for the problem. It might be a mobile payment that is more suitable for that very moment. Like when you're sitting in a car which you don't own, which you kind of just use as a capsule to travel, right? But it might be very interesting for the OEM to have the ID sitting in the mobile as well, right? So now you're going to see, if we come back to the slide from David Birch, you could imagine having multiple digital identities. One in your car, one in your smartphone, one in your other car, one in another car where you're just passenger, traveling, for example, you've got the limousine service bringing you to the airport and you want to have like some services being used on the passenger seats in the back, right? You could have another identity there. And being as an OEM on all of those modalities basically gives you the opportunity to traverse, like, and move seamlessly from the one to the other. So that's...
You could also have multiple accounts, no different than on
exactly.
Macintosh. You can have multiple accounts and
Yeah.
enable those.
Yeah.
But important thing is the OEM knows about the connections, right? It knows like it's the Markus in the car with his car. Now it's the Markus with the smartphone in a taxi, and I can give precise advice what like the interaction could be there, right?
Yeah. But isn't that an argument for actually moving the identity to outside the car, actually, to the cloud?
Yes. Google, if you compare Apple Pay and Google Pay, it's exactly like that spectrum, right? The Apple is on the smartphone, the Google is more on the cloud, right? We are working on a cloud-based framework at the moment because of the limitations of the car, right? This makes us fast at the moment, so we could theoretically move that along, but we want to keep the strong anchor of the connection between the three, like the payment method, driver, and the car, as decentralized as possible, because this is hard to hack. You need to have the car for it, right? Ultimately, we talked about that we need to go for a cloud-based approach to be more seamlessly in terms of moving across, right? There needs to be a lot of research, and this is a call for all of us, how to make that secure enough that a bank trusts us for that. Because if the bank steps in, we have 3DS, we have all the madness, we are back in the medieval ages. Okay, a little exaggerating now.
I'm an e-commerce person. I've been working in retail and transactions for a long time, and what we always focus on the retail side of the world is margin, margin, margin.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear that you're using the vehicle as the authentication device, it
Mm-hmm.
says that we can go to the banks and get a card present certification, which means I can shave a whole point off of the transaction from the bank.
Yeah.
Where are you on card present versus card not present?
Yeah, well, card presence you have to consider the whole setup in the moment of the payments. If you are considering card present, you need to go into the point of sales moment, like where you kind of stationary business that you do. Yeah? And with that, you definitely have the opportunity. Like, for example, the big thing is like, for us on the Starfish side, like the car is a big POS terminal at the end of the day, right? And if it bumps into the drive-thru on McDonald's, not making any ads here, but of a big burger chain, right? You could use that locality between the car and the shop, basically, to do cheap transactions at the end of the day. If you do that on the ride to the McDonald's, situation is a little different to that, right? So, but again, it's like another factor of, or another facet of the multimodality that we have to deal with, right?
Well, and in terms of making it card present, or let's say it's presence in general, and proof of owner, or that you're physically there at the point of sale, there's a lot of signal. It's a 5,000-pound proof of presence as well.
Yeah.
I think that's work that needs to be done within the payment card community in terms of looking at that transaction type and how to make that transaction type, here's a vehicle transaction type, or this has happened via vehicle, and proving that extra point, basis point could be
Worth.
accepted.
Yeah, exactly. It's also like the distance is a topic
That's
like.
also a part of how you tokenize.
Yeah.
So there are tokenization mechanisms that will prove card presence. And to Markus's point, there are trade-offs. All of these things on what you do on the card versus on the cloud.
Yeah, we call it a car present transaction.
We should claim that, yeah, exactly. The card
I haven't
present.
used that in a while, but yeah, that's
I like that one, yeah. Okay. Good. Any other questions?
Excellent slides, by the way. Love
Thank
the
you.
artwork.
Yeah, well, this is it's my consulting background. Like. Thank you very much. Have fun on the COVESA. Talk to you.